Chapter 1. The Glade of Whispers. The sun had sunk beneath the horizon, leaving behind a tapestry of deep blues and silvers. The forest grew darker with every step Julien took, the towering trees forming an endless labyrinth of shadows. His legs ached from days of relentless travel, and his steed, Beaufort, snorted softly, as if sharing his fatigue. A chill settled over the land, an unnatural stillness suffusing the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Julien pulled his forest-green cloak tighter around his shoulders, his hazel eyes scanning the path ahead. A faint light shimmered in the distance, soft and inviting, like a lantern in a storm. His curiosity, coupled with a knightly instinct to investigate the unknown, urged him forward. He soon found himself standing at the edge of an otherworldly glade. The mist here was thick and luminous, swirling gently around his feet, as if it possessed a life of its own. Silver moonlight bathed the clearing, casting an ethereal glow on the glade's heart, where a lone figure stood. The maiden appeared almost as a wraith, her veil obscuring her face, though her presence exuded a strange and undeniable allure. She wore a flowing gown that seemed to ripple like water, and in her delicate hands she held a single crimson rose that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Julien's breath caught as the petals shimmered, their edges glowing as if lit from within by a hidden ember. "Who are you?" Julien called out, his voice steady despite the unease prickling at his senses. He rested a hand on the hilt of his sword, though he made no move to draw it. The maiden tilted her head, her voice soft yet echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "A seeker comes to the heart of the wood. Tell me, Sir Julien of Calmont, what is it you seek?" Her knowing use of his name startled him. "I seek the strength to fulfill my quest, to honor my vows as a knight of Bretonnia. And you, who are you to know my name?" "I am a part of this place," she replied cryptically, stepping closer. The mist seemed to part for her as she moved, her veil fluttering in a breeze Julien could not feel. "But I am also more. I offer you this." She held the rose out toward him, her voice growing heavier with intent. "Take it, and with it, vow to be my protector. Devote yourself to my plight, and in turn, your path will become clear." Julien's hand hovered over the rose, hesitation tugging at him. "What is this rose? And why should I trust you?" She stepped closer still, and though her face remained veiled, he could feel her piercing gaze through the fabric. "It is a bond, a promise. Trust me, or do not. The choice is yours. But know this, fate led you here. Refusing its call is folly." Her words stirred something deep within him, a sense of destiny, of purpose. His hazel eyes narrowed as he studied the rose, its faint glow casting crimson light onto his gauntlet. Though uncertainty lingered in the back of his mind, his heart urged him forward. He reached out and grasped the stem. The instant his fingers closed around it, a warmth surged through him. The rose pulsed faintly with life, its glow intensifying for a moment before settling. Julien gasped as images, flashes of shadows, battles, and the maiden's sorrowful figure rushed through his mind like a torrent. Then, just as quickly, the visions faded. "You are bound now," the maiden said, her voice carrying both solemnity and sadness. "Your devotion will be tested, Sir Julien." He steadied himself, his grip tightening on the rose. "I swore an oath to protect those in need, and I will uphold it. But I will uncover the truth of who you are." A soft laugh escaped her. "Perhaps you will, or perhaps you will fall, as others before you. We shall see." Without another word, the maiden turned and walked deeper into the mist, her form dissolving into the glade's silver haze. Julien called after her, but the only reply was silence. He stood alone in the glade now, the rose in his hand faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. Though his doubts lingered, a strange determination settled over him. Whatever magic had tied him to this rose, to the maiden, he would see it through, if only to uncover the mystery that now consumed him. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The silver mists of the enchanted glade slowly dissipated as Sir Julien stepped away, the glowing rose clutched tightly in his gauntlet. The maiden's cryptic words echoed in his mind, mingling with the eerie stillness that surrounded him. As the last traces of her presence faded into the moonlit forest, a knot of unease twisted in his chest. Who was she? What had he pledged himself to? Beaufort whinnied softly, breaking the silence. Julien stroked the destrier's mane, speaking more to himself than the horse. "We'll find answers. Somewhere." He guided Beaufort back onto the forest path, navigating the dense, shadowy terrain until the trees thinned and the faint glow of lanterns came into view. A small village lay ahead, its cottages huddled together as if bracing against some unseen threat. The air was thick with an unnatural tension, and the few villagers still outside quickly darted into their homes at the sight of the armored knight. Julien dismounted at the entrance of the village's lone tavern, its warped wooden sign swinging faintly in the breeze. The warm light spilling from its windows promised refuge, but as he pushed open the heavy door, the quiet hum of conversation died. All eyes turned to him, wide and wary. He stepped inside, his boots clinking softly against the wooden floor. "I seek shelter for the night," Julien announced, his voice steady, though he could feel the weight of their stares. "And answers." The barkeep, a burly man with a thick beard, nodded reluctantly and gestured toward a corner table. As Julien made his way across the room, the whispered murmurs began again, low and furtive. He caught snippets, words like glade and spirit, but they faded whenever he neared. After a few moments, the barkeep approached with a mug of ale, his gaze flickering uneasily to the rose at Julien's side. "You've come from the forest," the man said, his voice low. "From the glade." Julien leaned forward, his hazel eyes sharp. "You know of it?" The barkeep hesitated, then crossed himself. "Only fools wander there. That place is cursed. A spirit haunts it, one that tempts the brave and the desperate alike." "Spirit," Julien repeated, frowning. "What sort of spirit?" "They call her the Rose Spirit," the barkeep muttered, his eyes darting around the room. "She lures knights and wanderers with her beauty, makes them swear oaths they can't keep. Those who return, if they return, speak of nightmares and madness. Some say she's a fey. Others claim she was cursed by the gods themselves." "And what of the rose?" Julien asked, his hand tightening around its stem. "That's her mark," the man replied grimly. "A bond, they say. A curse, more likely." The room fell silent again as the barkeep's words settled over the crowd. One of the older villagers, a gray-haired woman, leaned toward Julien, her voice trembling. "If you've taken her rose, you're bound to her now. The only way to break the curse is to find the old hermit who lives on the edge of the marsh. He knows the stories. He might know a way to free you." Julien studied the faces around him, their fear palpable. He had hoped for clarity, but their warnings only deepened the fog of uncertainty in his mind. Was the maiden truly cursed, or was she something far more dangerous? As the villagers returned to their hushed conversations, Julien finished his ale in silence. His thoughts churned with doubt, but one thing was clear. If the hermit held answers, Julien would find him, no matter the risk. He rose from the table, his armor clinking softly as he adjusted his cloak. Turning to the barkeep, he asked, "Where can I find this hermit?" The man hesitated, then pointed toward the eastern road. "Follow the path to the marsh, but be careful, knight. The glade isn't the only place cursed by shadows." Chapter 3. The Hermit's Warning. The forest grew darker and more oppressive as Sir Julien ventured eastward, guided only by the barkeep's vague directions and the faint glow of the rose in his hand. Beaufort trod carefully, his hooves crunching through the thick underbrush as if even the great destrier sensed the unnatural energy surrounding them. Shadows danced among the trees, and the air carried a faint whisper, too faint to discern, but impossible to ignore. After hours of searching, Julien spotted a clearing ahead. Nestled within it was a decrepit hut, its roof sagging beneath the weight of time and its walls overgrown with moss. A thin column of smoke rose from the crooked chimney, curling into the overcast sky like a beckoning finger. He dismounted, tying Beaufort to a nearby tree, and approached the hut with caution. The door creaked open before Julien could knock, revealing the hunched figure of an aged man. The hermit's face was lined like old parchment, his eyes a piercing gray that seemed to see straight through Julien. He wore tattered robes patched with scraps of fabric, and in his gnarled hands he gripped a wooden staff. "You carry the rose," the hermit rasped, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "Come inside. We've much to discuss." Julien hesitated but stepped through the doorway, ducking under the low frame. The interior of the hut was cramped and cluttered, filled with shelves of dusty tomes, jars of strange herbs, and charms made of bone and feathers. In the center of the room stood a rickety table, its surface covered with maps and diagrams marked with cryptic symbols. A single candle flickered on the table, casting long, wavering shadows. The hermit gestured for Julien to sit, and though his instincts urged caution, the knight complied. He placed the rose on the table, its faint glow illuminating the hermit's weathered hands as he reached out to examine it. "It looks warm. It has chosen you," the hermit murmured, his gaze fixed on the flower. "Or perhaps she has chosen you." "Who is she?" Julien asked, his voice firm. "Is she a fey spirit, as the villagers claim, or something else?" The hermit sat back, folding his hands in his lap. "The truth is not so simple. The maiden you saw may indeed be fey, or she may be a mortal woman cursed to serve their will. The line between the two is often blurred. What I do know is this: the rose binds you to her fate. Its magic is ancient, older than the stones of this land." Julien's brow furrowed. "Then how do I break the bond?" "To break it, you must first understand it," the hermit replied. "There is a place, far to the north, where her story began. Caldrith Keep, they call it now, a ruin steeped in sorrow and shadow. If you wish to uncover the truth, you must journey there." Julien's hand clenched into a fist. "And what will I find there?" "Perhaps answers, perhaps only more questions," the hermit said, his tone heavy with caution. "But be warned, the keep is no ordinary ruin. It is a place where the veil between worlds is thin. You will face trials that test not only your strength, but your very soul. Are you prepared for such a path?" Julien met the hermit's gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. Though doubt tugged at the edges of his resolve, he could not turn back now. "I swore an oath to protect her. I will see this through." The hermit nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then may the lady guide your steps, Sir Knight, but tread carefully. Not all who seek the truth find it, and some truths are better left buried." As Julien rose to leave, the hermit handed him a weathered map, marked with the location of Caldrith Keep. "This will guide you, but it is not enough to see you safely through. Trust your instincts. And remember, fate has a way of binding those who try to escape it." With the map tucked into his cloak and the rose still faintly pulsing in his hand, Julien mounted Beaufort once more and turned his gaze toward the distant horizon. Caldrith Keep awaited, its shadows promising answers, or perhaps his doom. Chapter 4. A Duel. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the winding path as Sir Julien rode onward, guided by the hermit's map. The journey north toward Caldrith Keep had been uneventful thus far, save for the occasional rustling in the trees or the faint call of birds overhead. But as he crossed a shallow stream, the sound of hoofs, Julien halted Beaufort and looked up to see a lone rider approaching. The knight wore polished armor adorned with a crimson surcoat, his helm decorated with the sigil of a snarling wolf. As he drew closer, his hand rested on the pommel of a sword that gleamed in the fading light. Julien's instincts bristled. This man carried himself with an air of authority and hostility. "Halt, stranger," the knight called, his voice sharp and commanding. "You tread on lands belonging to the house of Dargon. State your name and purpose." "I am Sir Julien of Calmont," Julien replied, his tone measured but firm. "I seek no quarrel. My path takes me north to Caldrith Keep, nothing more." The knight scoffed, his lips curling into a smirk as he dismounted. "A questing knight, are you, chasing fables and dreams while others defend these lands with real steel? You'll not pass without proving your worth." Julien dismounted as well, sensing that words alone would not resolve this encounter. "I mean no disrespect to your house, but my quest is sacred. Stand aside, Sir Knight, and let me pass." "Sacred or not, you'll not set foot further unless you can best me," the knight said, drawing his sword with a flourish. "I am Sir Allard of Dargon, and I challenge you to a duel." Julien sighed inwardly but nodded. It was not the first time his oath-bound journey had drawn the ire of a rival knight, nor would it be the last. Drawing the sword of Calmont, its engraved motto catching the light, he stepped forward. The two knights squared off in the open clearing, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows over the ground. Sir Allard struck first, his blade a blur as it sliced through the air. Julien parried deftly, the clash of steel ringing out like a bell. Allard's strikes came fast and heavy, his style aggressive, but Julien moved with precision, his training guiding him through the storm. Their swords met again and again, sparks flying as each sought to find an opening. Allard pushed Julien back, his strikes growing more forceful. "Is this all the honor of Calmont can muster?" he taunted, grinning through gritted teeth. Julien's hazel eyes narrowed. He shifted his weight, letting Allard's next swing pass harmlessly by, and countered with a swift blow that struck the other knight's shoulder plate. Allard staggered, his balance faltering, and Julien pressed the advantage, forcing him to retreat. Finally, with a sweeping strike, Julien disarmed Allard, sending his sword clattering to the ground. He pointed his blade at Allard's chest, his breath heavy but his resolve steady. "Yield," Julien commanded. Allard stared at the blade, his expression a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration. After a moment he raised his hands. "I yield." Julien lowered his sword and stepped back, extending a hand to help Allard to his feet. The other knight hesitated but took it, rising with a begrudging nod. "You fight well, Sir Julien," Allard said, dusting himself off. "Better than most. I see now that your quest is not one of vanity." "I see that your honor is true, Sir Allard," Julien replied. "I meant no offense by crossing your lands. My path is one I cannot abandon." Allard nodded, his expression softening. "Then go, with my blessing. But be warned, Caldrith Keep is no place for the faint of heart. Many who venture there do not return." "I will heed your warning," Julien said, mounting Beaufort once more. "May the lady watch over you." As Julien rode away, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The duel had not only tested his skills but reminded him of the principles he swore to uphold: honor, respect, and mercy. Though his path remained uncertain, his resolve burned brighter than ever. Chapter 5: The Haunted Road. The road to Caldrith Keep wound through a barren expanse where the forest gave way to a desolate wasteland. The trees that remained stood gnarled and twisted, their skeletal branches reaching skyward like the fingers of some ancient, long-dead giant. The air grew colder with every step Beaufort took, the horse's breath steaming as Julien tightened his grip on the reins. The faint glow of the rose in his hand seemed feeble against the encroaching gloom. It was the kind of place that sapped the spirit, a land where even the wind seemed too afraid to howl. The silence was broken only by the faint clinking of Julien's armor and the soft crunch of Beaufort's hooves on the cracked, lifeless earth. Yet, as he pressed onward, Julien began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him. It was as though the very shadows were watching, waiting. Then, faint at first, he heard the whispers. Turn back. And cannot be trusted. Where the rose? Julien froze, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. He scanned the road ahead, but there was nothing, only mist creeping across the ground, coiling like smoke. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became an indistinct chorus of warning. He urged Beaufort forward, his voice steady as he muttered, "Onward, my friend. Fear will not guide us." But as they moved deeper into the mist, shapes began to form, ghostly figures emerging from the shadows. The specters were pale and translucent, their features blurred as if half forgotten by time. Some appeared to be knights, their armor rusted and tattered, while others bore the humble garb of common folk. All of them stared at Julien with hollow eyes. One figure stepped forward, more distinct than the others. He was a knight, his armor tarnished and dented, his tabard hanging in frayed tatters. His face was gaunt, his hollow gaze fixed on the rose in Julien's hand. "You carry her mark," the ghost said, his voice echoing as though carried on a distant wind. Julien straightened in the saddle, his hazel eyes meeting the spirit's lifeless gaze. "Who are you? What do you know of this rose?" "I was once as you are," the ghost replied. "A knight, bound by honor and faith. She promised me glory, salvation. But the rose is a lie, Sir Julien, a trap. It binds you to her will, and when you fail, as I did, it will bind you to this place." Julien's jaw tightened. "If you failed, it was not the rose's doing but your own. I am not so easily swayed." The ghost's expression darkened, his voice rising with a mixture of anger and despair. "You speak of strength, but you know nothing of the cost. She will lead you down a path of ruin, and when you fall, no one will remember your name. Turn back while you still can." The chorus of whispers grew louder, the other spirits pressing closer. Their warnings were a cacophony of fear and regret, clawing at Julien's resolve. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. The hermit's warnings, the villagers' fears, the maiden's cryptic words, they all swirled together in a storm of uncertainty. But Julien's grip tightened on the reins, and he drew the sword of Calmont. Its blade gleamed faintly in the dim light, a symbol of the honor and duty he had sworn to uphold. "I will not falter," he declared, his voice cutting through the ghostly whispers. "My path is clear, and my faith will see me through. Begone, spirits. I have no time for your riddles." The ghost knight stared at him for a long moment, then slowly stepped back, his form fading into the mist. One by one the other specters dissolved, their whispers fading into silence. The air grew still again, though the cold lingered, biting at Julien's skin. He sheathed his sword and urged Beaufort forward. The haunted road stretched on, the faint outline of Caldrith Keep rising in the distance like a jagged shadow against the gray horizon. Though the spirit's warnings lingered in his mind, Julien pressed onward, his faith tested but unbroken. Whatever awaited him at the keep, he would face it with courage, and with the rose as his guide. Chapter 6. The Ruins of Caldrith Keep. The looming silhouette of Caldrith Keep rose before Sir Julien, its jagged spires clawing at the overcast sky. The structure seemed less a castle and more a monument to despair, its walls crumbling under the weight of centuries. Vines and moss crept up the stone, while gaping windows stared like empty eyes into the encroaching mist. A chill ran down Julien's spine as he dismounted Beaufort, leaving the faithful destrier tethered to a tree just outside the broken gates. The air within the keep's walls was heavy, suffused with an unnatural stillness. Julien's boots crunched on fragments of stone and shattered wood as he stepped into the ruins. The faint glow of the rose in his hand cast eerie light onto the crumbling corridors. Shadows stretched and warped along the walls, as if the keep itself were alive and watching his every move. He moved cautiously, his other hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The hermit's words echoed in his mind. The keep is no ordinary ruin. The veil between worlds is thin here. Each step seemed to confirm the warning, the air thick with the lingering presence of something unholy. In the heart of the keep, Julien entered what might once have been a grand hall. The remnants of ornate carvings lined the walls, though much of the stonework had eroded. One relief, however, remained remarkably intact. It depicted a woman kneeling before a towering figure wreathed in swirling vines and sharp thorns, the unmistakable image of the Fey Queen. The woman's hands clutched a rose, its petals aglow even in the stone depiction. Julien's gaze fell to an ancient pedestal beneath the carving. Atop it lay a tattered book, its leather cover cracked with age. He hesitated, then reached for it, his gauntleted fingers brushing the brittle surface. The book fell open to reveal a diary, its pages filled with delicate handwriting that spoke of desperation and regret. Excerpt from the diary. My name is Liana. I was once a lady of this keep, but my pride was my downfall. I sought the power to protect my people from famine and war, and so I made a pact with the Fay Queen. She granted me the rose, a tether to the mortal world, but at a terrible cost. My soul is bound to her now, neither living nor dead. Only the destruction of the rose can set me free, but it would mean the end of my existence altogether. I have tried to break the curse, but her guardians watch my every move. To those who find this, beware her gifts, for they come at the price of your soul. Julien stared at the page, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. The maiden was Liana, a mortal woman ensnared by the Fey Queen's power. The rose he carried was not only a symbol of their bond, but also the key to her salvation, or her destruction. His mind raced as he tried to reconcile the truths he had uncovered. Was the maiden an innocent victim, or had her pride and ambition made her complicit in her own curse? Before he could ponder further, a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Julien turned sharply, his hand flying to his sword as the shadows around him began to move. From the edges of the room emerged creatures forged of darkness, their forms shifting and writhing as though barely contained. They had no eyes, only gaping maws filled with jagged teeth. The creatures circled him, their movements unnatural and erratic. Julien drew the sword of Calmont, its blade catching the faint light of the rose. He raised it high as the first shadow lunged, its claws slashing through the air. The knight sidestepped, bringing his sword down in a swift arc that cleaved the creature in two. It dissolved into smoke, but more replaced it, their guttural snarls filling the hall. Julien's training took over as he fought with precision and determination. His blade danced through the air, each strike felling a creature only for another to take its place. He gritted his teeth, the weight of the battle pressing down on him. The rose pulsed in his hand, its glow growing stronger, as if urging him on. One shadow surged toward him, larger than the others, its claws raking across his breastplate. Julien staggered but recovered, driving his sword through its center. The creature let out an unearthly wail before disintegrating, its essence scattering into the ether. The last of the shadows retreated into the corners of the room, their forms dissolving into the dark stone. Julien stood alone once more, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He glanced at the rose, its light steady and unyielding, a reminder of the bond he had sworn to uphold. With the diary tucked into his belt and his resolve hardened, Julien turned toward the shattered doorway leading deeper into the keep. Liana's story was clearer now, but the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. The shadows of the past had tested his strength, but the true trial still lay ahead. Chapter 7. A Revelation in Dreams. The battle with the shadowy creatures had left Sir Julien battered and weary. His armor bore fresh scratches from claws that seemed to cut through steel like parchment, and his muscles screamed with every movement. When he found a small alcove within the crumbling ruins of Caldrith Keep, he sank to the cold stone floor and allowed himself a rare moment of reprieve. The faint glow of the rose cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. its light both a comfort and a reminder of the weight he now carried. As exhaustion overtook him, Julien's head slumped against the wall. Sleep came swiftly, dragging him into a dream that felt too vivid to be mere imagination. He stood in a field bathed in golden sunlight, a stark contrast to the desolate ruins he had left behind. Wildflowers swayed in a gentle breeze, and the distant hum of a songbird carried on the wind. Julien turned, and there she was, the maiden. Her veil was gone, revealing a face both hauntingly beautiful and heartbreakingly sorrowful. Her features were sharp yet delicate, her eyes a deep, endless blue that seemed to hold a sea of memories. She wore the same flowing gown as before, but it shimmered like liquid silver under the warm light. "Liana," she said, her voice soft but clear, as if she had read his thoughts. "That is my name." Julien took a hesitant step toward her. "Liana, I have read your words. I know of your pact with the Fey Queen." A shadow passed over her face, dimming the light around her. "Then you know my curse. I sought to save my people from famine and ruin, but I underestimated the Fay Queen's cruelty. The rose she gave me was a bond, one that tethered me to her will. I am neither alive nor dead, bound to wander the edges of this world and hers." Her voice trembled as she continued. "I have tried to break free, but the Fay Queen's power is too great. She guards her secrets fiercely, and all who have tried to help me have fallen. I did not wish to draw you into this, Sir Julien, but I fear you are now my only hope." Julien's hazel eyes narrowed, his resolve firm despite the dreamlike quality of the scene. "Then tell me how I can free you. There must be a way." Liana reached out, her fingers brushing against the rose in his hand. A pulse of warmth spread through Julien, and suddenly the idyllic field shattered like glass. Images flashed before his eyes, scenes of Liana's life. He saw her as a noble woman, standing tall and proud as she negotiated with the Fay Queen beneath a starless sky. He saw her despair as the crops in her lands withered and her people cried for salvation. He saw her kneeling before the Fay Queen, her trembling hands accepting the rose, and her anguished screams as she realized the true cost of her bargain. Finally, he saw her wandering the glades and forests, veiled and alone, her every step shadowed by the Fay Queen's dark servants. The visions faded, leaving only Liana's voice. "The rose is the key, but its magic is tied to the Fay Queen's domain. To sever the bond, you must face her, though to do so is to risk everything." Julien's hand tightened around the rose. "I have faced darkness before, Liana. If there is a chance to save you, I will take it." Tears glimmered in her eyes as she stepped closer, her form beginning to fade. "You are brave, Sir Julien, but even the bravest knights fall. Be wary of her lies, for she will try to twist your heart against itself." Her voice grew faint as her image dissolved into the golden light. "Find me, Julien, before it is too late." Julien awoke with a start, his breath ragged and his heart pounding. The alcove was as cold and desolate as before, but something had changed. He glanced at the rose in his hand and froze. Its petals, once vibrant and alive with a soft crimson glow, had darkened. The edges now looked as though they had been singed, their color fading to black. The faint light it emitted flickered erratically, as though responding to the weight of his dream. Julien's chest tightened, uncertainty gnawing at him. Was the rose a sign of his progress, or a warning of the dangers ahead? He pushed the thought aside and rose to his feet, his resolve solidifying. Liana's plea echoed in his mind, her trust and desperation intertwining with his own sense of duty. The path was clearer now, though it loomed with far greater peril. If the rose was his bond to her, it would also guide him to the Fay Queen's domain. And if that was where his quest would lead, so be it. With the rose in hand and determination burning in his heart, Julien pressed on into the darkness. Chapter 8. the Fey Queen's emissary. The path through the ruins led Ser Julien into a dense thicket where the trees grew unnaturally close together, their twisted branches entwining overhead like a cage. The dim light of the rose cast eerie shadows, the flickering glow barely enough to illuminate the way forward. Despite his resolve, Julien couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Beaufort snorted uneasily, stamping a hoof against the damp earth. Julien patted the horse's neck. "Easy, my friend," he murmured. But the air itself seemed alive with anticipation, the stillness so profound it pressed against his chest. A sudden rustling in the underbrush snapped Julien's attention to his left. His hand flew to the hilt of his sword as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was not human, that much was clear. The figure was tall and impossibly slender, draped in a flowing robe of shimmering black and green. Its face was partially obscured by a mask shaped like curling vines, leaving only glowing, pupilless eyes visible beneath the intricate design. The being moved with an unsettling grace, its feet never seeming to touch the ground. "The Sieur Julien of Calmont," the figure intoned, its voice smooth and lilting, like a melody carried on the wind. "You have come far, but you tread a dangerous path." Julien stood his ground, his hazel eyes fixed on the emissary. "And who are you to judge my path?" The figure tilted its head as if amused. "I am but a messenger, sent by my queen to deliver an offer. She has taken notice of your quest and admires your resolve." Julien's grip tightened on his sword. "If your queen admires me, she can grant me the truth and the means to free Liana." The emissary's laugh was a soft, chiming sound. "Ah, but you misunderstand. My queen offers not burden but release. Leave the maiden to her fate, abandon your quest, and the Fay Queen will reward you richly. Lands, wealth, glory, whatever your heart desires. Even the Grail itself could be within your grasp." For a fleeting moment, the emissary's words hung in the air, as sweet and alluring as honeyed wine. Julien's mind conjured images of victory, his banner flying high, the cheers of his people, the honor of his family restored. The weight of his quest pressed heavily on his shoulders, and the thought of laying it down was a temptation he could not entirely ignore. But then his gaze fell to the rose in his hand, its darkened petals pulsing faintly. He remembered Liana's face, the sorrow etched into her features, and her plea for help. He shook his head, clearing the haze from his mind. "Your queen offers me baubles," Julien said, his voice steady. "But I have sworn an oath, and I will not abandon it, nor Liana." The emissary's glowing eyes narrowed, the air around them growing colder. You would refuse the generosity of the Fey Queen? You are a fool if you think your mortal resolve can stand against her will." Julien raised his sword, its blade catching the faint light of the rose. "Perhaps I am a fool, but I am one bound by honor. Go back to your queen and tell her I will not be swayed." The emissary's form seemed to ripple, its once smooth voice turning sharp and venomous. "Then you will face her wrath, Sir Knight. She does not forgive defiance, nor does she suffer insolence lightly. You will find no solace, no salvation, only ruin." With those parting words, the emissary dissolved into a swirl of black mist, its form scattering into the air as though it had never been. The forest fell silent once more, but the oppressive weight of the encounter lingered. Julien lowered his sword, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Though his resolve had not faltered, the emissary's words echoed in his mind, stirring doubts he could not entirely suppress. What if the Fay Queen's power was too great? What if his defiance truly did lead to ruin? He shook his head and mounted Beaufort, his knuckles white as they gripped the reins. "Come, Beaufort," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "We've wasted enough time." As they pressed onward, the rose pulsed faintly in Julien's hand, its light a fragile beacon in the growing darkness. Though the emissary's offer had tested his resolve, it had also deepened his determination. Whatever trials awaited him, he would face them head-on, for his path was set. But deep within, he could not help but wonder how much of himself would remain by the journey's end. Chapter 9. The Trials of Devotion. The path ahead shifted as though the forest itself was alive, funneling Sir Julien into a narrow clearing bathed in an otherworldly glow. The air grew heavier, and the faint hum of unseen magic thrummed in Julien's chest. In the center of the clearing stood 3 stone archways, each etched with intricate runes and glowing faintly in shades of gold, blue, and crimson. Before them lay a pedestal bearing an inscription carved into weathered stone. Julien stepped closer, the rose in his hand pulsing, as if in recognition. The inscription seemed to speak directly to him. To free the bound, prove your devotion. Courage, compassion, sacrifice, only through these shall the path be revealed. He clenched his jaw, his hazel eyes scanning the archways. The air around him shifted, and he felt an unseen force urging him forward. With a steadying breath, he approached the first archway, glowing gold. As he stepped through, the world dissolved into blinding light. The trial of courage. Julien found himself standing on the edge of a narrow stone bridge, suspended over an abyss. Below him churned a sea of shadows, writhing and hissing as if alive. On the far side of the bridge, a towering beast emerged, its form shrouded in darkness, save for glowing red eyes. Its guttural roar shook the ground beneath Julien's feet. The rose flared in his hand, its light casting back the shadows, though only faintly. The beast charged, its claws tearing into the stone as it barreled toward him. Julien gripped the sword of Calmont tightly, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. He stepped onto the bridge, each movement deliberate. The beast roared again, lunging with claws outstretched. Julien sidestepped, his blade flashing as he struck. The beast howled, but it was not enough to fell it. The bridge crumbled beneath their struggle, leaving Julien to leap from stone to stone, the abyss yawning beneath him. His courage did not waver, even as the beast's claws raked across his armor, tearing through steel and flesh. With a final desperate lunge, Julien drove his sword into the beast's heart. It let out a deafening wail before dissolving into smoke, the bridge repairing itself as if by magic. Julien staggered, blood seeping from his wounds, but the golden glow of the archway reappeared before him. When he stepped back into the clearing, the rose glowed brighter, its darkened petals regaining a faint crimson hue. The trial of compassion. The blue archway beckoned next, its light cool and inviting. Julien stepped through and found himself in a village unlike any he had seen before. The air was thick with despair as spectral figures milled about, their faces gaunt and hollow. They reached out to him, their ghostly hands clutching at his armor. A child stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Please, Sir Knight, my mother is dying. Can you save her?" Julien hesitated. The spectral figures seemed endless, each crying out for help. He could not possibly aid them all, but the child's plea pierced his heart. She led him to a small hut where a woman lay on a crude bed, her face pale and her breathing labored. A shadowy figure loomed over her, its clawed hand hovering just above her chest. The child sobbed, clinging to Julien's leg. "You can save her," a voice whispered, though Julien could not see its source. "But doing so will cost you dearly." Julien gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. "What must I do?" "Take her pain," the voice replied. "Bear it yourself and she will be free." Without hesitation, Julien stepped forward, gripping the shadowy figure's wrist. The moment their forms touched, a searing pain shot through his chest. His vision blurred as he felt the woman's sickness coursing through his veins. But he did not let go. The shadow dissolved, and the woman's breathing steadied. The child's cries turned to laughter, as the figures around them faded into light. When Julien stumbled back into the clearing, his body felt weaker, his steps heavier. But the rose pulsed brighter, its light cutting through the surrounding gloom. The trial of sacrifice. The crimson archway loomed before him, its light foreboding and intense. Julien stepped through, his heart heavy with anticipation. He found himself standing in a desolate battlefield, the bodies of knights strewn across the blood-soaked ground. At the center of the carnage stood a single figure, Liana. She was bound by thorny vines that coiled around her body, her eyes wide with fear. Before her stood an apparition of the Fey Queen, her form radiant and terrible. "To free her," the Queen said, her voice cold and sharp, "you must surrender yourself. Your quest will end here, your story forgotten. Are you willing to die for her?" Julien's chest tightened as he looked at Liana. The weight of his journey pressed against him, every scar, every trial flashing before his eyes. He thought of his father's legacy, of the honor he sought to restore. But as he looked into Liana's pleading gaze, he knew his answer. "I will," he said, stepping forward. The thorns lashed out, wrapping around him. Pain seared through his body as the vines dug into his flesh, but he did not cry out. Liana's bonds dissolved, and she fell to her knees, free at last. The Fay Queen's laughter echoed as the battlefield faded to black. Julien awoke in the clearing, his body trembling and scarred. The rose in his hand burned brightly now, its petals fully restored to their vibrant crimson hue. Though his body was broken and his heart heavy, his resolve was unshaken. The trials had tested him, but they had not broken him. With the rose as his guide, he rose to his feet, prepared for whatever lay ahead. Chapter 10. The Heart of the Glade. The forest grew silent as Sir Julien approached the enchanted glade, the air thick with the same strange energy he remembered from his first encounter there. The crimson rose in his hand burned brighter than ever, casting a warm glow against the cool darkness of the surrounding trees. It pulsed faintly, as though it were alive, its rhythm matching the steady beat of his heart. Beaufort slowed, snorting softly as if sensing the weight of the moment. Julien dismounted and walked forward, his armor battered from the trials, but his steps resolute. The mist began to part, revealing the glade bathed in moonlight, just as it had been when he first arrived. At the heart of the glade stood Liana. She was no longer veiled, her face fully revealed in the soft glow of the rose's light. Her beauty was ethereal, but it was the sorrow in her eyes that struck Julien the most. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and despair. "You've returned," she said, her voice trembling. "I feared you might not survive the trials." Julien nodded, stepping closer. "I swore an oath to see this through, Liana. I will not abandon you." Her gaze fell to the rose, its glow reflecting in her tearful eyes. "Then you know what must be done." Julien hesitated. "Tell me." Liana extended a hand toward the rose, her fingers stopping just short of touching it. "The rose is the source of the curse, but it is also my tether to this world. To break the Fey Queen's hold on me, you must destroy it." The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Julien's brow furrowed as he studied her face. "And what happens to you if I destroy it?" Her voice broke as she answered, "I will be free, but not as you hope. My mortal form is tied to the rose's magic. Destroying it will end the curse, but it will also end me." Julien took a step back, his grip tightening on the rose. "There must be another way. You've lived bound by this curse for too long to lose everything now." Liana shook her head, her expression one of quiet resignation. "I have accepted my fate, Sir Julien. But you—" She paused, her voice softening. "You have a choice. You could walk away, live your life without this burden. You owe me nothing." Julien's heart clenched at her words. He had seen her sorrow, her pain through the visions and trials. He had fought against shadows, endured suffering, and resisted temptation for her sake. To abandon her now, to let her sacrifice be in vain, was unthinkable. "No," he said firmly. "I cannot. I will not. There must be another way." Liana's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting amidst her despair. "The Fey Queen will not give up her hold so easily. She will try to twist your resolve, to make you doubt. Are you truly prepared for that?" "I am," Julien said without hesitation. "I will find another way, Liana. I swore to protect you, and I intend to keep that vow." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Instead, she stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. The rose pulsed between them, its light flaring for a brief moment. Julien felt a warmth spread through him, a faint echo of her presence lingering in his mind. "If you choose to defy her," Liana said, her voice barely above a whisper, "then you must face her in her own domain. The rose will guide you, but its light will dim as her power grows stronger." Julien nodded. "Then guide me, Liana. I will face her." The glade seemed to shudder, the air growing colder. Liana stepped back, her form flickering as though the magic tethering her to the world was weakening. "Be careful, Julien. The Fay Queen will stop at nothing to protect her power. You will face trials beyond anything you've known." "I'll see it through," he said, his voice steady. Liana offered him a faint, bittersweet smile before her form faded into the mist, leaving Julien alone in the glade. The rose in his hand pulsed softly, its light now dimmer but still steady, a fragile beacon in the encroaching darkness. With a deep breath, Julien turned back toward the forest. His path was set and his resolve unshaken. He would find a way to free Liana, no matter the cost. Chapter 11. Betrayal and Capture. The forest grew darker as Julien pressed onward, the glow of the rose dimmer than before. Its faint light flickered, barely piercing the oppressive shadows that seemed to close in around him. Every step felt heavier, as though the weight of his journey had finally begun to take its toll. Still, he kept his focus on the path ahead, the memory of Liana's plea driving him forward. The snap of a twig shattered the stillness, and Beaufort whinnied nervously, his ears flicking back. Julien instinctively drew his sword, his hazel eyes scanning the underbrush. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Julien's heart sank as recognition struck him. Ser Allard stepped into the faint light of the rose, his crimson armor gleaming with an unnatural sheen. His face bore a triumphant sneer, but there was something hollow in his eyes, as though a shadow had taken root within him. "Allard, Allahi," Julien said, lowering his sword slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Following your trail, Sir Julien," Allard replied, his voice laced with mockery. "You didn't think I'd let you walk away from our last encounter unchallenged, did you?" Julien frowned. "This is no time for petty rivalries. There are greater forces at work here." Oh, I know," Allard said, stepping closer. His gaze flickered to the rose in Julien's hand, and his smile widened. "The Fay Queen has shown me what you carry. That rose holds power beyond your comprehension, power wasted on someone like you." Julien's grip tightened on the rose. "You've been corrupted," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "The Queen has twisted your mind with promises of glory." Oleg laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "And why shouldn't I accept her offer? She has given me strength, purpose. She sees me for what I truly am, a knight worthy of greatness." "Well, strength is a lie," Julie said. "It comes at the cost of your soul." Elar's expression darkened, his sneer twisting into a snarl. "Enough! Hand over the rose, or I'll take it by force." Julien raised his sword, his resolve firm. "I will not let you have it." Allard drew his blade, and the two knights clashed. The sound of steel on steel echoed through the forest as their swords met in a flurry of strikes. Julien fought with precision, his movements fueled by the lessons of countless battles, but he quickly realized that Allard's strength was unnatural. His blows were heavier, faster, driven by the Fey Queen's dark power. Despite his best efforts, Julien found himself driven back, his exhaustion catching up with him. Alar feinted left, then lunged, striking Julien's sword from his grasp. Before Julien could react, Alar's gauntleted fist crashed into his chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The rose slipped from Julien's hand, landing in the dirt. Allard scooped it up, holding it aloft with a victorious grin. "At last," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "This power will be mine." Julien struggled to rise, but Allard's boot pressed down on his chest, pinning him to the ground. "You've always been a fool, Julien," Allard sneered. "Your ideals of honor and devotion mean nothing. Power is all that matters." "I'll parrot." "You don't understand," Julien gasped. "The rose is not a gift, it's a curse. It will destroy you." Allard ignored him, his attention fixed on the rose as its glow dimmed further, as though recoiling from his touch. Before Julien could say another word, Allard struck him on the side of the head with the hilt of his sword. Darkness consumed him. Imprisoned, Julien awoke in a dim, cold chamber. The air smelled of damp stone and decay, and his hands were bound with iron chains that bit into his wrists. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred as he tried to focus on his surroundings. He was in a dungeon, the walls lined with jagged stones that dripped with moisture. Memories of the ambush flooded back, and his chest tightened with the weight of his failure. Alahad had taken the rose, and with it, Julien's only chance of saving Liana. He had sworn to protect her, yet here he was, defeated, imprisoned, and alone. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was not Allard, but one of the Fay Queen's servants, a hunched creature with sharp, gleaming eyes and a twisted grin. It carried a tray of stale bread and water, which it placed just out of Julien's reach. "Your queen must enjoy watching me suffer," Julien said bitterly. The creature cackled. "She enjoys the taste of broken spirits," it rasped. "And yours will be her finest feast." As the creature disappeared into the shadows, Julien slumped against the wall, his resolve wavering. He had failed to protect the rose, failed to keep his promise. The image of Liana's sorrowful face haunted him, her words echoing in his mind. You must face her in her own domain. But how could he? Bound and powerless, the path forward seemed impossible. Yet, deep within him, a spark of determination refused to die. He had survived the trials, resisted temptation, and faced insurmountable odds before. He would find a way to escape, to reclaim the rose, and to finish what he had started. With his jaw set and his resolve rekindled, Julien whispered into the darkness, "I am not done yet." Chapter 12. The Escape. The dungeon was silent, save for the distant dripping of water and the occasional skittering of rats. Sir Julien sat in the darkness, his wrists bound in iron chains, his armor dented and stained with dried blood. Yet, though his body was weakened, his spirit remained unbroken. He had failed to protect the rose, had lost it to Sir Allard's treachery, but the battle was not yet over. A sound stirred in the corridor beyond his cell. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Julien straightened, muscles tensing as he prepared for whatever came next. A familiar snort broke the silence. Beerfoot. Julien's heart leapt at the sound of his faithful destrier. The heavy thud of hooves echoed closer, and then the flickering torchlight revealed a figure moving toward his cell door. It was not a guard, nor one of the Fey Queen's servants. It was Beaufort himself. Standing in the narrow corridor, his powerful frame almost too large for the space. A crude rope dangled from his mouth, remnants of what had once been reins. Julien let out a breath of disbelief and admiration. Good lad. The warhorse pawed at the ground and nudged the door, his nostrils flaring. It took Julien only a moment to understand. Beaufort had followed his scent, tracked him here, and somehow managed to break free of whatever tether had held him. That meant only one thing. The Fey magic that bound this place was weakening. A sharp, urgent neigh told Julien that his time was running out. Using what strength he had left, he yanked at his chains, feeling the rusted iron strain. He braced his feet against the stone floor, pulled harder until finally, with a snap, the shackles cracked apart. His wrists burned from the effort, but he wasted no time, pushing himself up just as Beaufort reared back and slammed his powerful hooves into the door. The rotten wood shattered. Julien lunged forward, grabbing onto Beaufort's reins as he swung himself up onto the warhorse's back. No saddle, no time. He tightened his grip on the destrier's mane and gave a firm command. "Ride, Beaufort, now." The warhorse needed no further urging. He surged forward, hoofs thundering against the stone as he charged through the corridors. Guards and Fey creatures shouted in alarm as the great beast barreled through the underground fortress, his sheer force toppling anything in his path. The exit loomed ahead, a rusted iron gate barely large enough for a horse to pass. Julien leaned forward, bracing himself as Beaufort galloped full speed toward it. At the last moment, the mighty steed leapt. The two of them crashed through, bursting out into the cold night air. The hunt for Allard. Rain lashed against Julien's face as he urged Beaufort forward, the storm above raging with an almost supernatural fury. The wind howled through the trees and lightning split the sky, illuminating the twisting path ahead. Somewhere in the distance, hidden deep within the heart of the forest, Allard was making his way toward the Fay Queen's altar. And he had the rose. Julien's jaw clenched. He could not allow the Fay Queen to claim it. He had made a vow to protect Liana, to end this curse. That vow burned in his heart now, guiding him as surely as the stars once had. Beaufort's hooves pounded the earth, each stride closing the distance between them and their quarry. The storm churned above, unnatural in its fury, as though the Fay Queen herself sensed his pursuit. "Faster, Belforster," Julien called, his voice cutting through the wind. The stallion responded, surging forward with renewed strength. Julien's hand found the hilt of his sword. His body ached from the trials he had endured, but pain no longer mattered. Only the fight ahead, only the promise he had made. Ahead, deep within the storm, he caught sight of the faint glow of the rose. Allard was close. The final confrontation awaited. Chapter 13. The Duel at the Altar. The storm had reached its peak by the time Sir Julien arrived at the Fay Queen's altar. Rain lashed against the jagged stones, and lightning split the sky in violent flashes. The trees that encircled the ancient site twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches bending toward the altar as if they were part of the Queen's dark will. The air hummed with magic, thick and suffocating, distorting the very fabric of reality. Before the altar was completely dissolved, the crackling creatures from the altar. At the center of it all stood Sir Allard. The treacherous night held the crimson rose aloft, its glow wild and chaotic, pulsing as though it was trying to break free from his grasp. The magic of the Fay Queen coursed through him, his crimson armor now wreathed in unnatural shadows. His eyes, once filled with ambition, now burned with something more. Julien slowed Beaufort to a halt and dismounted, drawing the sword of Calmont. "Allard," he called over the wind. "This ends now." Allard turned, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're persistent, I'll grant you that." He lifted the rose, the storm around them intensifying. "But you're too late, Julien. The Fay Queen has already chosen me. I will be more than a mere knight. I will become legend." Julien stepped forward, his grip tightening on his sword. "You've traded your honor for power. That is not legend, that is ruin." Allard let out a sharp laugh. "Spare me your sermons. I will not let you take this from me." He brandished his own sword, its steel now corrupted with veins of dark energy. "If you want the rose, then you will have to pry it from my hands." The ground beneath them cracked as the altar's magic warped the battlefield. The stones twisted into impossible shapes, and the storm itself seemed to spiral around them. Julien's surroundings blurred, the world shifting between reality and nightmare. And then Allard charged. Their swords met in a brilliant clash, sparks flying as steel ground against steel. Allard was faster than before, his strikes infused with unnatural strength. Julien barely had time to parry the onslaught, his feet skidding against the slick stone as he fought to hold his ground. The rose's magic twisted the battlefield, distorting distance and time. One moment Julien was locking blades with Allard, the next he was several paces away, barely dodging a strike that should have landed. Shadows stretched and writhed like living things, grasping at his ankles. The air pulsed with whispers, taunting him with words of doubt. "You will fail. You will fall." Julien grit his teeth and pushed forward, meeting Allard's blade with renewed determination. Their duel raged across the altar, each strike shaking the ground, sending ripples through the swirling magic. Then Allard made a mistake. Drunk on his newfound power, he swung too wildly, overextending his reach. Julien saw his opening and drove forward, his sword cutting through the storm. The sword of Calmont struck true, slicing through the shadows that clung to Allard's armor. Allard staggered back, gasping as his sword slipped from his grasp. The storm faltered, the dark magic flickering. Julien advanced, his blade poised at Allard's throat. The traitorous knight fell to his knees, panting heavily, his eyes wide with realization. The rose, now freed from his grasp, lay on the altar, glowing fiercely as if reclaiming its lost power. Allard looked up at Julien, his face contorted with pain and regret. "End it," he rasped. Julien hesitated. He had every right to strike him down. Allard had betrayed him, stolen the rose, and nearly doomed Liana. But despite everything, he was still a knight, one who had been led astray, consumed by his own ambition. Julien lowered his sword. "No," he said firmly. "I will not stain my blade with vengeance." Allard's shoulders sagged, his breath unsteady. The magic around them receded, the storm beginning to calm. Julien stepped past him and reached for the rose. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of warmth flooded through him. The rose pulsed, its crimson light steady once more, as if acknowledging its rightful bearer. The battle was won, but the true test was yet to come. As Julien turned toward the heart of the storm, where the Fey Queen's presence loomed, he knew the final confrontation awaited. Chapter 14. The Fey Queen's Wrath. The storm had not yet settled. The sky churned with unnatural energy, clouds twisting into spirals of shadow and fire. The wind carried a whisper, not of the forest nor the storm, but something far older, far colder. The presence of something ancient and cruel seeped into the air. Julien stood at the altar, the crimson rose clutched tightly in his hand, its glow steady and unwavering. Behind him, Sir Ellard remained on his knees, his breath ragged, his strength spent. Then the world shuddered. The trees trembled as a wave of unseen force rippled outward from the heart of the storm. The wind died, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. The very air thickened, pressing down like an invisible weight. And then she arrived. From the shadows, the Fay Queen emerged. She did not walk, she glided, her form impossibly tall and wreathed in twisting vines and flowing silk woven from starlight. Her face was obscured, a mask of shifting silver, and her eyes, cold, endless voids, pierced through Julien's soul. She exuded power, a force beyond mortal comprehension. The land itself bowed to her presence, the grass withering beneath her touch. "Sir Julien of Calmont," she spoke, her voice neither soft nor loud, but resounding like an eternal whisper in his mind. "You have defied me." Julien tightened his grip on the sword of Calmont. the weight of the Queen's presence threatening to crush him. "I have fulfilled my oath," he said, standing tall. "I have reclaimed the rose. You will not have it." The Queen's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "You have claimed nothing, foolish knight. That rose does not belong to you." The shadows writhed around her, stretching toward him like reaching hands. "You have been given a chance, Sir Julien. Leave now, abandon the girl, abandon this folly, and I will grant you safe passage." Julien met her gaze, unwavering. "No." The air crackled, the weight of the Queen's power growing heavier. "You would rather face my wrath?" she asked, her voice no longer amused but seething. Julien took a step forward. "You are no goddess, you are no queen of mine. I serve the Lady of the Lake, and she watches over me." At that moment, the rose in his hand blazed with light. The shadows recoiled. The Fey Queen hissed. Julien raised his sword as a divine radiance erupted from within him, a force not of fey trickery, but of something pure, the lady's blessing, strong and unwavering. A shield of light formed around him, its brilliance pushing back against the creeping darkness. The Fey Queen screamed, her form twisting, unraveling as the light expanded. The vines around her burned away, her shadowed form retreating, shrinking. "You cannot save her," she snarled, her voice distorting as she was driven back. "The rose is a prison. You will doom her to an eternity of suffering." Julien did not falter. The light of the lady surged forward in a final blinding burst. The Fey Queen shrieked as her form was banished back into the storm. The clouds above roiled, breaking apart, and for the first time in centuries, the stars above the altar were visible once more. The battle was over. Julien exhaled, his strength nearly spent. The rose, now calm in his grasp, pulsed with warmth, not the wild, chaotic magic it once held, but something gentler, something free. Behind him, Allard stirred, watching in awe. Julien turned his gaze toward the distant glade where Liana waited. One final task remained. Chapter 15. Redemption and Release. The journey back to the glade was silent. The storm had passed, the weight of the Fey Queen's presence lifted. Yet Sir Julien felt no triumph, only the quiet ache of duty fulfilled. He carried the rose gently in his gauntleted hand, its glow now soft and steady, as if at peace. Beaufort moved slowly beneath him, the great war-horse sensing his night's weariness. The scars on Julien's body ached, but they were nothing compared to the burden in his heart. He had won the battle, defied the Fey Queen, and reclaimed the rose, but at what cost? The glade was as he had left it, bathed in silver mist, the first light of dawn breaking through the ancient trees. The grass swayed gently, whispering in the wind, and in the center of it all, she was waiting. Liana. She stood amidst the mist, her form ethereal, untouched by time. She was no longer bound by a veil, no longer hidden in sorrow. Instead, she gazed at him with warmth, her eyes filled with something he had not seen before. Peace. Julien dismounted, stepping forward, his battered armor clinking softly. "You returned," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promised I would," Julien replied. Her gaze fell upon the rose. "The Fey Queen is defeated. The curse. It can be broken now." Julien held the rose up, studying its delicate petals. "Tell me what I must do." Liana stepped closer. "The rose was my tether, the chain that bound me to the Fey Queen's will. To break the curse, it must be unmade." Julien's grip on the rose tightened. "And what of you?" She smiled, though sorrow still lingered in her expression. "I was lost long before you found me, Sir Julien. My soul has lingered too long in this world. If you break the rose, I will be free." The words weighed heavily upon him. He had fought for her, sacrificed for her. To lose her now felt like an unbearable cruelty. Liana reached out, her fingers barely brushing against his hand. "Do not grieve for me," she murmured. "I have known suffering, but because of you, I have also known hope." Julien took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had vowed to protect her, and now he would keep that vow one final time. With careful hands, he brought the rose close and whispered a prayer. A soft light surrounded them, and as Julien clenched his fingers, the rose crumbled to ash. A breeze stirred through the glade, catching the ashes and carrying them into the rising dawn. Liana's form shimmered, the bonds of her curse unraveling like mist in the morning sun. She met his gaze one last time, her smile radiant. "Thank you, Sir Julien." And then she was gone. Julien stood alone in the quiet glade, his hands open, the last remnants of the rose drifting away. His chest ached, not with regret, but with something deeper, a newfound understanding. Devotion was not about possession. Love was not about conquest. True devotion was the willingness to give, even when it meant letting go. He turned toward Beaufort, placing a hand on the stallion's neck. The sun now stretched across the horizon, warm and golden. The world had changed, and so had he. He had come seeking glory. Instead, he had found wisdom. Mounting his horse, Sir Julien took one final look at the glade before riding forward into the dawn. His quest was over, but his journey had only just begun.